Hello friends. Tonight's story isn't about dragons or damsels, not about glory or banners rippling in the wind. Tonight's story is heavier, wetter, more worn down by time. Because the truth is, most knights didn't ride into legend. They trudged, limped, waited for pay that never came. Their swords dulled faster than their bones broke, and their names lost to rot and rain. So go ahead, dim the lights, lay your head down. Maybe let the sounds of clinking armor and tired hooves guide you into rest. Because tonight, we are stepping into the day-to-day grind of a man you've heard about your whole life, but never really seen. A knight. Not the myth, but the man. Imagine yourself curled on a rough wool blanket, somewhere in a drafty stone outbuilding. It's not your castle. Knights didn't own castles. It's your lord's manor. You've been lent a corner of the stable loft, or maybe a spot by the groomsman's barracks. The straw pokes through the sackcloth. It smells like horse. It's still dark when the squire nudges you. He's young, tired, probably half frozen. He slept beside the tack to keep it from freezing solid. Your boots are stiff with frost and yesterday's muck. One of them leaks. You slide your foot in anyway. There's no breakfast waiting. Just a crust of barley bread from your belt pouch, hard as stone and speckled with flower moths. You gnaw it slowly with teeth you've had repaired by a blacksmith, because there aren't dentists, only pliers and grit. The armor, it's heavier than you remember. Every time. Male first, that long shirt of interlocking rings. It sags over your shoulders like wet rope. The cold seeps into the iron. You try not to think about the smell, the mix of rust, sweat, and old blood that never quite washes out. Your squire fumbles with the leather ties. He's scared of you maybe, but more scared of getting it wrong. You pull on your surcoat, a padded gambeson underneath, laced up tight. It's damp. It rained last night, and you didn't have a roof. You stretch out your arms. Everything pinches. The bruises from yesterday haven't gone down. Your left shoulder throbs with every movement. And then there's the horse. The horse doesn't like you. Most war horses didn't. They weren't pets. They were muscle, bred for violence. Taller than you, heavier than you, and often smarter. Yours is called something noble, like Bellerophon or Castor. But you've been calling him bastard under your breath for weeks. He snaps his teeth when you approach. Your squire's too small to help, so you muscle the bit into place and strap the bridle with stiff fingers. The saddle creaks. One of the straps has worn thin, and the buckle's been repaired with twine. It'll hold. You hope. You throw your leg over and settle into the saddle. The padding is worn down to the wood. The iron stirrups bite into the sides of your battered boots. Every jolt sends a shiver up your spine. Your thighs are raw where the mail rubs. And that's before the first hour of riding. You set out. There's no parade, no cheering villagers. Just the sucking sound of hooves in mud. Maybe you're headed to patrol the edge of the estate. Maybe you're escorting a tax caravan. Maybe you're on your way to a skirmish, but no one called it that. They just said, get ready. Your squire trails behind, carrying a pack nearly his size. He won't be paid either, not this month. The sky is low and grey. The cold seeps into your gloves. A crack in your thumbnail throbs. You split it 2 nights ago, pulling your sword free from a frozen sheath. The blood dried black inside your gauntlet. You didn't notice until the cross started to sting. There's no conversation. Knights didn't chat. Not on the road, not in the cold. You ride in silence, counting every breath and wondering how many more leagues until the next fire. And every moment, every jolt of the saddle, every bite of wind, every twitch of muscle trying not to shiver. You remember something. You are not paid to win. You are not paid to eat. You are not even paid to survive. You are paid to show up in iron, to be seen, and to not fall down until the man next to you does first. Your fingers don't stop shaking. You tell yourself it's the cold, but it's not. It's the weight of steel, of debt, of expectation. You weren't born into it. Most knights weren't. You bought your armor, borrowed coin, took favors. Each piece a promise you couldn't afford. And now you wear it like shame. The mail shirt alone costs more than your father's house. The sword, a battered thing, sharpened so many times it curves like a smile. A cruel one. You fight not for gold, but for the right to keep the armor, to stay useful, to keep your place at the table, even if it's the floor beside it. You hear the drums, or maybe it's your heart, a small ambush. They say it'll be quick. It never is. You crouch behind a rise. Rain soaks your hood. The leather under your breastplate squeaks when you breathe. Then it starts. A flash of movement. Steel glinting in the wet. A horse screams. A man falls. You lunge forward. Not to win, to be seen trying. Your sword catches on a branch. You swing again. It connects. You don't look to see what it hit. You duck, block, move. The sound of metal on metal is deafening. Like bells. If bells made you bleed. Then, quiet. You're alive, you think. Your ears ring. Your arms are numb. Your throat is raw from breathing too hard. A squire grabs your reins, pulls you back. You mount again. Not because you feel ready, because you must. Because that's what a knight does. The sun sets before your back. Not that it matters. There's no warmth waiting. You dismount. Your knees buckle. The squire catches your elbow, then pretends he didn't. You remove the helmet first. It smells of breath and rust. Your hair sticks to your scalp. You can't feel your ears. Next, the gauntlets. You peel them off like old bark. The skin underneath is pale, wrinkled, split in places. A cracked nail throbs beneath dried blood. Your back aches, not from wounds, from the saddle, from the armor, from carrying the weight of expectation all day again. Dinner is cold, barley porridge. Grey, bland, lumpy. You eat in silence with the others. No one speaks unless spoken to. Your lord wasn't there. He was inside, in the hall, with wine, laughter, warmth. You wipe your mouth with the back of your glove, because the linen napkins aren't for you. Night falls hard. You roll your blanket out by the wall, not near the fire. That's for men with names. You sleep in your clothes, in case something happens, in case you're summoned, and you will be. Soon. Always. Because a knight doesn't rest. A knight obeys. A knight endures. Even when his body can't. Even when no one remembers his name. He wasn't drunk. He wasn't fat. He didn't stumble through court with a turkey leg in one hand and a joke in the other. That man, Falstaff, is fiction, made for laughs, wobbly and ridiculous. But the real man, he wore plate armor, fought in France, watched men die in the mud, buried friends under torchlight. Sir John Fastolf was a knight, a real one, born in Norfolk, 1380, not noble, not quite, but close enough to reach for it. He entered service young, a squire by his teens, fought in Ireland, crossed the Channel. He didn't ride in with fanfare. He didn't slay dragons. He followed orders and survived. Agincourt came in 1415. You know the name. It echoes in legend. But for Fastolf, It was another field, another command, another day to endure. He fought well, served under Thomas of Lancaster, the king's brother. He earned favour, land, a title, eventually a pension. But glory fades quickly. He kept fighting, years of it, sieges, skirmishes, political messes with swords drawn. He bled for a cause. That cause changed, and when it did dash, he was left holding the bill. It was the summer of 1444. John Fastolf was no longer a young man. He was over 60, silver in his beard, stiffness in his joints. But still, he rode. Still, he fought. He had served 3 kings by then. He had built estates, owned land across Norfolk, commanded troops, funded campaigns, and made enemies. But for all his rank and experience, there was one thing he couldn't control: rumour. The 100 Years' War was limping toward its final act. France was winning back cities. English morale was low. The glory days were fading. What remained was mud, fatigue, and desperation. And in that weary climate came the Battle of Bedtime. It wasn't supposed to be a disaster. Fastolf wasn't even leading the charge. The main force was under Lord Talbot Dash. Braver, perhaps, but rash. The English archers were late setting their defences. No stakes in the ground, no time. The French cavalry came fast, too fast. The arrows flew, some hit, but not enough. Within minutes, the English lines buckled. Confusion spread like fire. Talbot was captured. Dozens of knights fell. Fastolf, he was in the rear, with reserves. He saw the collapse and made a choice. He retreated. He didn't rally, didn't turn the tide. He chose survival, and his men followed. When news of the defeat reached England, the court wanted someone to blame. Talbot was a prisoner, a hero in chains. He couldn't be blamed. But Fastolf had returned, unwounded, alive. That was enough. They said he ran, said he abandoned the fight, said he brought shame to the order. He was stripped of the garter, the most prestigious knighthood in England. A public disgrace. He protested, wrote letter after letter, to the king, to the council, to anyone who would listen. He listed names, dates, maps, explained the retreat. But war is not kind to nuance. An honour, once dented, rarely shines again. 17 years passed. 17. Until a royal inquiry finally cleared him. His garter was returned. But by then, he was an old man, nearly forgotten. The ink on Shakespeare's first folios was still far in the future. He died before the world forgave him. And even then, his name was twisted, turned into a punchline. Falstaff, the coward, the fool, a man who never existed. And yet, in some way, he became more famous than the real knight ever was. After Bedtime, Fastolf didn't vanish. He didn't withdraw. He wrote. That was his weapon now. Not the sword, the quill. Dozens of letters survive. Careful, measured, pleading. Some to the crown. Some to fellow knights. Others to clerks, stewards, or merchants. Many to lawyers. Always polite. Often desperate. They speak of a man who knew how to fight, but not how to be heard. He wrote about debts, supplies, unpaid wages, promises made by lords who now looked away. He requested restitution, clarification, recognition. The words are never angry, but they carry a quiet exhaustion, a weight. You can almost hear his pen scratch on the page, in a cold room surrounded by chests of unopened mail. In one letter, he He calculates the cost of his lost lands in France. A manor here, a vineyard there, gone. He writes of soldiers he paid out of pocket, fortifications he built, armies he helped supply. He signs his name carefully. Still Sir John Fastolf, still proud. But the ink fades. The responses come slowly, or not at all. He owned property across East Anglia, Caister Castle, the jewel, built high and strong, paid for with French coin, won in campaigns. But even there the walls couldn't keep out time. The manor sagged, the roof leaked. He kept writing, because if he didn't speak for himself, no one else would. Caister Castle still stands, in part. The great tower is mostly whole. The walls lean, the moat has dried. But once, it was Fastolf's legacy. He built it himself, not with his hands, but with his coin. And more than that, his identity. This was no feudal stronghold passed down through generations. It was new, strategic, well placed near Yarmouth. A symbol that a soldier could build something lasting, that land could replace blood, that stone might speak louder than the tongue of rumour. He invested in it, stone by stone, trained masons, detailed instructions, windows set to catch the sun, rooms built for scholars and clerks. He imagined it as more than a fortress. It was to be a place of learning, of letters, of peace. His household was large, servants, retainers, priests. He even took in distant kin. He held court, gave orders, but rarely smiled. Not by reputation. Even in his own home, Fastolf was known as sharp-tongued, impatient, precise, not cruel, not warm. He had money, but no heirs. A knight's life rarely leaves time for children. And he had no wife. Only the house. Only the title. Only what he'd managed to claw from war and worry. And so, in his final years, he lived in a kind of silence, surrounded by paperwork, chests full of French claims, maps of land now held by someone else. And yet he wrote. He hired scribes, clerks, compilers. He wanted his records preserved, his life written down. He knew history could forget, or worse, misremember. He knew names could be stolen. In his later years, Sir John Fastolf wasn't just managing estates. He was managing memory. He knew what people said. He'd heard the laughter in court, the stories whispered in noble halls. And he understood, perhaps better than most, that reputation wasn't just earned on the battlefield. It was constructed, piece by piece, in the minds of others. So he tried to shape his own legacy. He sponsored priests, commissioned prayers to be said for his soul. He offered gifts to religious houses, even planned the founding of a college, not just for charity, but for permanence. He didn't want to be remembered as the man who ran from battle, because he hadn't. He wanted to be remembered as a man of duty, of service, of faith. He was meticulous in his planning. He drafted wills, then rewrote them, again and again, changing names, adjusting inheritances, trying to find someone, anyone, who might carry on what he built. But none of it was easy. He had no son, no heir strong enough to keep Caister whole. And the lawyers, they were always circling. Disputes arose even before he died. Claims on his property, arguments over his intention, competing versions of his will. He had spent decades in war. And now, his final battles were made of parchment and ink. And still, he wrote, the tone in his final letters is weary. There's a sadness between the lines, a sense of someone watching the tide pull back, knowing it will not return. But there is also dignity. Even in retreat, he had built, he had served, he had endured. That, he hoped, would be enough. Sir John Fastolf died in 1459. He was around 79 years old, an exceptional age for a knight of his generation. There were no trumpets, no grand funeral processions through London, no bardic verses written in his honour. He died quietly, at home, in Caister. By then, his body had long since betrayed him. His hands, once strong enough to lift a sword, could barely hold a quill. His back was likely bent from years of armour, his legs stiff from old wounds, his nights restless. The world he helped shape, a world of long campaigns and English dominion in France, was ending. And when he passed, he left behind more than lands. He left confusion. His will, long prepared, was immediately challenged. Some said it had been altered. Others claimed coercion. A few swore that Fastolf had changed his mind in his final days. Caister Castle, his greatest work, became a point of contention. One of the main claimants was a man named John Paston, a minor nobleman, well-connected, ambitious. He claimed Fastolf had granted him the estate, but there were others. Powerful families, royal officials. Disputes turned into lawsuits, lawsuits into sieges. Yes, actual sieges. Caister Castle was attacked and taken. Its halls, once meant for scholars and scribes, echoed with armed footsteps. This wasn't the chivalric world Fastolf had imagined. It was a scramble, a battle over property, over memory. The letters from this period are bitter, frustrated, sometimes pleading. Descendants of the Paston family wrote to the king, to bishops, to anyone who might intervene. But justice came slowly, and in pieces. Fastolf's body was buried, but his legacy was torn apart, and all the while, his name slipped from the record. Not entirely gone, but softened, twisted. By the time Shakespeare wrote Henry IV, Fastolf had become Falstaff, a drunk, a coward, a fool. The real man was gone, and what remained was comedy. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It began with whispers, satirical poems, courtly jests, quiet mockery. Fastolf had been mocked in life, but in death, the laughter grew louder. By the 16th century, the lines had blurred. Chroniclers confused him with other men. Some still defended him. Others folded him into tales. Then came William Shakespeare. He needed a character dash, comic, blustering, loud, a man who could stumble through taverns and make audiences laugh between tragedies. So he took the name. Not exactly, but close enough. Falstaff, a jester in armour, a coward with a quick tongue, a foil to Prince Hal. Shakespeare likely knew who Fastolf had been. He'd read the chronicles, seen the records, and he chose to change the name. Subtly, but with purpose. Not out of malice, perhaps out of utility. But the result was permanent. The real Fastolf disappeared behind the fiction. Ask anyone today who Falstaff was, and they'll picture a rotund man, slurring lines, swinging a bottle, laughing at honour. Not a cold, quiet night, writing letters in a stone room, trying to preserve a name the world was already forgetting. Historians have tried to reclaim him, and in recent years, they've made some progress. They've sifted through his letters, measured the walls of Caister, rebuilt his life piece by piece. But the damage was done long ago. In the popular mind, Falstaff lives. Fastolf does not. A final irony for a man who fought so long to be remembered. Somewhere in Norfolk, beneath worn stone and damp earth, Sir John Fastolf rests. His grave is modest. No towering sculpture, no inscribed sword, just a name, sometimes misspelled. Visitors rarely come. The castle he built still stands in part, but now it is a heritage site, visited by families on slow weekends, children climbing what remains of his dream. His letters survive, hundreds, stored in libraries, catalogued in boxes, read mostly by scholars with quiet hands. They tell a different story than the stage, not one of ale and antics, but of land management, armor maintenance, debt disputes, and hope, always a flickering hope. That history might listen. He never had a son to speak for him, no wife to light a candle each year, just words, preserved on parchment, and a castle, once proud, now mostly shadow. Still, in some quiet way, he remains. In the careful ink of clerks, in the crumbling mortar of East Anglia, in the faint, flickering truth behind a character played for laughs. He was not a fool. He was not a coward. He was a knight, and he died, not in battle, but in silence. That, perhaps, was the hardest fate of all. It's one thing to read about knights in scrolls and letters, another to find their bones, not in temples of honor, but in quiet corners of old churches, in shallow graves beneath worn flagstones, in fields once called battlefields, now pasture or parking lots. Archaeologists don't go looking for legends. They look for traces, disruptions in the soil, shifts in texture, broken lines where the past surfaces again. And sometimes they find knights, not the full suits of armor you'd expect from movies, not perfect skeletons posed with swords crossed neatly over their chests. No, they find wear, damage, evidence of lives lived hard and often ended roughly. In one grave near a ruined priory in England, they found the remains of a man in his late 30s. He was buried in chainmail, or what was left of it. Fragments of iron rusted into the ribs, fused to the collarbone. The bones told a story. His spine curved sharply, likely from years spent in armor, his body constantly braced, compressed, ground down. Both shoulders were worn unevenly. He'd carried more weight on one side. Perhaps a shield. Perhaps he favored a certain sword stance. His arms showed healed fractures. One rib had been broken, then mended poorly. Most striking, his kneecaps were misshapen. Not from a single injury, but from time. A life lived on horseback. Joints pressed, pounded, and eventually deformed. There was no inscription, no heraldic symbol in the dirt, no grave goods, just bone and rust, and the story they whispered together. This wasn't glory, this was survival and pain, but it was also something else. A trace, a man who once breathed behind a visor, who trained, fought, aged, and was buried, perhaps without ceremony. Yet here he is again, speaking not through song or scroll, but through marrow. Across Europe, in places where battles once raged, excavation teams sometimes uncover something odd, not full suits of armor, but fragments embedded in skeletons. Small metal links, once part of chainmail hauberks, curled into ribs. Flattened buckles fused near the pelvis. Bits of helmet rim lodged beside jawbones. These are not weapons. They're not the cause of death. They're the remnants of armor worn so long, so constantly, that when the flesh gave way to time, The steel remained where it had rested, in one grave in northern France, dated to the late 14th century. A man was found lying on his left side, atypical for a burial of the time. The archaeologists noted unusual wear on his skeleton, scored grooves across the top of the skull, not from trauma, but likely from repeated chafing beneath a helmet rim. His spine was twisted, not from injury, but from imbalance, one hip higher than the other, a sign of long-term compensation for pain, possibly a limp from an old wound. His feet told their own story, toes misshapen, bones thickened. All 10 showed signs of chronic inflammation. And what lay beside him? The remains of sabatons, iron foot armor. Each one had left a rust stain in the soil, and beside them a knife, plain, functional, no ornament. There was no name, only the hint of status. Armor meant a certain rank, but not wealth, not luxury. This knight, or perhaps man at arms, was buried not with grandeur, but with what he wore to work. He had lived long enough to carry injuries into old age, healed ribs, worn joints, thickened wrists, all signs that he had survived what others did not. No monument marked his resting place, but his body kept the record. And that's what archaeologists read. Bone instead of ink, iron instead of words, the tale of a night told in silence. In southern Germany, near the edge of an old battlefield, a mass grave was uncovered. It wasn't marked, no crosses, no stones, just a long, grassy slope, unassuming, until someone turned the soil. What they found was layered, bodies stacked not neatly, but hastily. Crisscross limbs, bones at odd angles, shattered skulls mixed with broken blades. But this wasn't a peasant's grave. Among the remains were signs of status, spurs, gilded belt buckles, traces of chainmail, and beneath it all, horses, some whole, others partial, their skeletons tangled with those of their riders. The carbon dating placed the burial around the early 1300s, likely the aftermath of a regional conflict. One of many feuds between noble houses. One of the skeletons lay apart from the others. He had been placed more carefully, face up, arms folded. A sword lay near his side, not placed, perhaps dropped, but not far from his hand. His armor had mostly decayed. Only the rivets and a few corroded plates remained. But the positioning suggested a breastplate, perhaps an early transitional suit, part chain, part plate. His face had suffered, cheekbone crushed, nasal cavity fractured. But the damage was old, healed. His spine, too, told of survival. Compression fractures, the kind earned from falling, repeatedly, possibly a jouster, or a knight accustomed to being unhorsed and always climbing back up. There were 2 small silver coins near his left shoulder, tarnished, thin, but still marked with the face of a local duke. Payment for burial, or perhaps placed there by a companion. A final gesture before the earth came down. He wasn't alone. None of them were. These knights didn't fall in song or saga. They fell in mud, together, quickly, and the silence that followed lasted centuries, until a spade and then a brush uncovered what no one sang about. Not the fight, but the cost. Sometimes a knight left no letters behind, no diary, no account in court records, but his helmet might whisper his thoughts. In a museum in northern Italy, there's a visor, blackened by time, the edges softened by centuries of rust. It was found in a crypt beneath a collapsed chapel. At first glance, it's ordinary. Late 14th century, standard design, heavy, unforgiving. But inside, scratched faintly along the rim, a line of cramped Latin script. It isn't decorative, not fancy, just deliberate. Domine, libera me de gladia mortis. Lord, deliver me from the sword of death. Etched with a nail or pin, something small, done by hand, in haste or in fear. There were more marks nearby, tiny crosses, 3 of them, spaced evenly like a rhythm, a prayer in pattern. This wasn't a boast, not a maker's mark. It was private, likely never meant to be seen. There are other examples too. On a gauntlet recovered from a battlefield in Castile, a knight had scratched a name, perhaps a wife, perhaps a saint. Near it, a single word, fratres, brothers. And once, on the edge of a shield fragment buried in Flanders, archaeologists found something unusual, a short curse, crudely written, hard to read, but likely saying, "Let him who strikes me lose his hand." It wasn't always noble language, but it was human. Knights didn't always write histories, but they left marks, scratched into metal, cut into scabbards, hidden beneath straps, signs that they feared, that they hoped, that they remembered those they loved, and cursed those they fought. Steel can be blunt, but it can also carry whispers, not loud, not always clear, but real. We often think of armor as protection, a second skin, something that kept the knight alive. But armor didn't come without cost. Many skeletons recovered from knight burials show signs of long-term wear, damage not from battle, but from the armor itself. In a burial near York, a man in his 40s was found beneath a small chapel floor. No inscription, but the remains spoke clearly. His collarbones were thickened, deformed, likely from decades of shoulder straps pulling down on the joints. The vertebrae in his lower back were compressed. One nearly collapsed. Painful, slow damage. Not from a fall, but from pressure. Consistent weight over years. His knees had large bony growths. The result of bone grinding on bone. A sign of early onset arthritis. And his feet, crushed toes, misshapen arches. Not from being stepped on. From iron sabatons, foot armor. Heavy, rigid, unforgiving. This was a man who likely never walked easily. Every step strained, every climb into the saddle a test. And yet, he kept riding, kept serving. A surgeon examining the remains noted that this kind of damage was similar to what modern athletes suffer, but with no treatment, no surgery, no rest periods. The knight's body was his tool, and the armor was both shield and burden. In one particularly striking case, a skeleton found in Burgundy had deep grooves worn into the skull. A helmet, worn daily, had slowly pressed into the bone. The grooves weren't fatal, just persistent. Year after year, the helmet had become part of him, shaping his very skull. These weren't wounds of battle. They were the cost of service, of being armored not for a day, but for a lifetime. Protection, yes, but also weight, restriction, strain. Knighthood wore a man down, not just in spirit, but bone by bone. In a quiet village churchyard in southern England, archaeologists made a discovery that puzzled everyone. It was a burial beneath the nave, a prime location, often reserved for someone important. The skeleton was male, tall for his time, broad-shouldered. His bones were arranged with care, legs straight, arms crossed. Traces of what may have been a surcoat remained, of faded red pigment in the soil. Rust marked the presence of armor, a buckle near the hip, mail fragments near the thigh. But something was missing. There was no skull, not nearby, not displaced, just gone. The rest of the skeleton was undisturbed. No signs of hasty burial, no damage from scavengers. The grave was intentional, and yet no head. The team reviewed the records. The church had no documentation of a decapitation, no local execution story, no obvious battle site. So why would a knight be buried like this? Some theories emerged. One possibility, a battlefield casualty. Perhaps he fell in war, his head taken as a trophy, by enemies, or disturbingly, by allies seeking proof of his death. Another idea, a punishment after death. Knights who broke faith, who committed treason, were sometimes denied full burial honors. But this grave had care, respect, deliberate placement. So perhaps the missing head wasn't shame, it was mystery. Maybe the body was all they had. Found later, recognized by armor or by wounds, and laid to rest the best they could. To lose one's head, literally, was rare. But to lose one's identity, that was common. Thousands of knights died in battlefields with no markers, no names passed down, only bones beneath the grass. This man, buried so deliberately, without the part of him that spoke, saw, or remembered, speaks louder in silence than many whose tombs were carved in marble. He is a reminder that even among the elite, even those armored in steel and called Sir, the line between honor and oblivion was thin, and that sometimes what we find is what was left behind, and what can never be explained. Not all graves held only men. In parts of France, England, and Hungary, archaeologists have uncovered a rarer kind of burial, one that includes not just the knight, but his horse. These were not common. Horses were valuable. A war horse especially, trained, bred, battle-tested, could cost as much as a small manor. To bury one was a statement, and yet, in a few places, they did. One site in Central Europe revealed a deep trench, cut into the edge of a battlefield slope. Inside, a single human skeleton, flanked on either side by the remains of 2 horses. The human lay in armor fragments. A breastplate collapsed across the ribs. A sword snapped in 2. A helm flattened by time and weight. One horse had a broken leg. The other, no visible wounds. Their bridles had left faint impressions in the earth. Bits of leather preserved by the wet soil. The arrangement was deliberate, symmetrical. The knight at the center, as if even in death he was in command. Why bury the horses? Some believe it was honor. The bond between man and beast, a final act of loyalty, not from the horse, but from the people who buried them. Others suggest ritual, that the horses might carry their rider into the next world, and still others say it may have been necessity. The horses were wounded, too damaged to save, and rather than leave them to scavengers, they were laid beside their master. There is evidence the knight had healed injuries, broken fingers, a fractured collarbone. He had survived previous fights, but not this one. His sword had initials carved into the hilt. Hard to read, faded by time, but personal. The grave wasn't marked. No name, no family crest. Just 3 beings. 1 man, 2 animals. Interred in a triangle of loyalty. It speaks to something quieter than glory. To companionship, routine. To the long hours they spent together. Riding, marching, waiting. And then, in one final act, sharing rest. Not all nightly graves are bare. In some, small objects rest beside the bones. Personal, humble, and often mysterious. In one 15th century grave in Bohemia, a knight was found with a coin pressed into each palm. Not a religious practice, not a widespread tradition. Just 2 coins, worn, local, too old to be of use, too plain to show wealth. A gesture, perhaps. Payment for peace? A farewell from someone who remembered him? Elsewhere, in a forgotten graveyard near Avignon, a knight had been buried with a wooden comb, still intact, tucked near his hip, polished from use. The teeth of the comb were uneven. A few snapped, but the grain of the wood had been worn smooth. By years of fingers. Maybe it was a gift. Maybe it reminded him of someone. One burial in Wales revealed something even quieter. A piece of folded cloth, preserved in the airtight space beneath the chest. It had been stitched with a single line of text, in Welsh. Translated, it read, "Return if you can." A message of hope, or grief, or both. Knighthood is often spoken of in terms of steel and banners, of horses and charges, of oaths and glory. But these graves speak differently. They remind us that behind every helm was a man who lived day to day, who kept keepsakes, who missed home, who hoped for love or peace or rest. They remind us that not all battles are fought with swords. Some are fought with memory, with the wish to be known, to be remembered. And when archaeologists dust off a comb or lift a tarnished coin, they're not just finding artifacts. They're touching the silence between centuries and listening. You hear them before you see them. Laughter spilling through stained glass. The deep hum of a lute. Notes drifting out into the cold air. The great hall is lit from within. Gold, fire, shadows dancing across stone walls. Smoke curling upward from a wide hearth. Fat dogs sleeping under the table. You are not invited. You stand outside, back straight, boots still damp. A cloak pulled tight around bruised shoulders. The blood in your hair, dried now, sticks to your scalp like paint. Inside they toast to you, to our brave defenders, to the honor of our land. They raise goblets of silver, tilt back red wine thick as ink, and forget your name. You shift your weight, your legs ache. There's barley bread in your satchel, cold and crumbly. You chew without tasting. Someone opens the doors, a rush of warmth, and then it's gone again. You're sent to the side entrance, the servant's way. Your squire says nothing. Neither do you, because this is what a knight does. He waits, he protects, and sometimes he watches others feast. The ceiling arches above like a timbered sky. Oaken beams thick as tree trunks, blackened by years of smoke and song. Banners hang down in rows, each one a story you weren't part of. Boars, lions, crosses, symbols of lineages older than your grandfather's memory. The nobles are loud, laughing over meat and clinking brass. Their robes are red, purple, blue, dyed with things you'll never afford. Lapis, saffron, crushed beetle shell. Jewels wink on fingers that have never held a blade. They drink from goblets, gold-rimmed, wide-mouthed. Wine stains their lips the color of dried blood. They don't notice. At the high table, your lord leans back. His hands are clean, his beard trimmed. His doublet smells of lavender, not iron. He lifts his cup. To our brave men in mail. The room cheers, briefly. No one looks your way. There is a roast boar on the table, head intact, an apple between the teeth. It glistens with honey and cloves. Beside it, roasted pears, stuffed with almond, cinnamon, and something sweet. Steam rising, golden skin crackling. You smell everything, but you eat barley, cold, chewy, from a bowl too shallow to satisfy. A girl at the edge of the hall passes near you, a servant. She nods, then keeps walking. She carries a tray of spice pudding. You feel its warmth pass like a ghost. The minstrels begin to play again. Strings and soft drums. A tune meant to charm, not to honor. You shift in your seat near the wall. Not quite part of them, but not invisible either. You've taken wounds for the man at the high table. You've held a gate while the tower burned. You've bled for the silver on his sleeves. And tonight, he will sleep on linen sheets. You'll sleep in straw. The feast hall buzzes with voices. Lords talking to lords. Ladies nodding, smiling, sipping. They speak of falconry, of imported spices, of a new saddle made from Spanish leather. One man brags about a shipment of glassware, blown thin like eggshell, from Venice. Another tells of a hunting trip. He shot a deer. Missed the first time, of course. Blames the bowstring. A lady, not much older than your squire, asks about a poet. Have you read him? She laughs, not waiting for the answer. No one mentions the weather on the march, the smell of wet iron, the stiffness in your knees after days in the saddle. A young baron nearby touches the hilt of his sword. Polished, decorative. It's never been drawn. He says he's ready to ride soon, to feel the thunder of hooves beneath him. He's never heard them in anger, never been thrown, never felt a horse scream beneath him. You glance at his boots. They're clean, perfect stitching. You look at your own, frayed, caked in dried mud, sewn twice by your squire. The baron sees you. His eyes flicker, curious, but not respectful. Then he looks away. You don't blame him. To them, you're not legend. You're utility. A figure in steel, meant to be there, to guard, to salute, to vanish when the music begins. The minstrels begin again. They've been playing all night. Lute, harp, soft tambourine. A melody that rises like smoke. It isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. The nobility are not here to dance. They're here to be seen. Each note is gentle, a cushion for the voices above it. The kind of music that makes you forget your feet are cold. They sing now, a soft ballad about courtly love. A knight and a lady, secret glances, a scarf tied around an armored arm. The lords smile. Some close their eyes, nostalgic for things they never lived. You watch from the edge. You know that kind of song, not because you've lived it, but because it was never yours. Your scarf, if you had one, would be wrapped around your wrist to keep the blood in. The ladies laugh politely, sip wine. Not one of them has ridden to a siege, waited in a trench, heard men cough blood beside them. They clap for the minstrel's final chord. The hall echoes, cups refill, the music fades. You hear the fire crackle. You smell wax, meat, wine, rosemary. And your cloak still stinks of horse sweat. No one sings for that. Near the center of the hall, a game begins. It's a simple 1-dash. Dice, thrown into a silver bowl. Nobles crowd around. Lords and their sons, their cloaks tossed over chairs carved with lions and hawks. They wager not coin, but favors. A bottle of wine from Aquitaine. A knight's falconing rights. A silk belt imported through Calais. Laughter bounces from beam to beam. They speak in riddles, half-jokes, long inside stories you'll never be part of. One throws a double 6. Cheers erupt. Another feigns sorrow. He's lost a pouch of saffron. He never carried it. The stakes are pretend, but their delight is real. Across the room, a steward pours spiced wine into bowls. Not cups, bowls. Wide and heavy, meant to be shared between guests. One man drinks and grimaces. Too much nutmeg, he says. You think of your own cup. It's not metal, not carved. It's wood, cracked near the rim. You've had it for 6 years. Your squire once tried to polish it with goose fat. Didn't work. They throw the dice again. Someone boasts he once gambled a horse. No one believes him. That doesn't matter. Because tonight, reality is far away. No frostbitten hands. No screams on the wind. No thundering hooves bearing real death. Tonight, they play. You glance toward the door. The torches outside burn low. Your horse is stabled nearby, muzzled, damp. He took an arrow last season. Not deep, but deep enough. You tended to him yourself, boiled water, cleaned the wound with a scrap of linen. He's still limping. But not one of these men would know what it costs to keep a warhorse alive through winter. Their dice clatter on silver. Another round begins. One man suggests wagering a page boy. He laughs. No one objects. You don't laugh. You haven't laughed in weeks. You don't play games. You wait. You guard. You bleed. And when you do rest, it's not beside the hearth. It's beneath your shield. The tables creak beneath the weight of it. Platters layered with meats. Roasted venison dripping with clove-scented glaze. Game birds skewered with sprigs of thyme. Fish served in almond sauce, their eyes still intact. There are pies shaped like castles. Pastry domes that rise like fortresses over stewed pears and goat cheese. Each crust stamped with the ring of a noble's seal. Not for flavor, for vanity. You see trenchers, rounds of bread thick and stale, used as plates, soaked with gravy and fat. Later, they'll be tossed to the dogs, or the poor, or the pigs. There's a dish you don't recognize. A bright orange mush, sweet-smelling. Someone says it's carrot pottage thickened with egg yolk. Imported spice makes it taste like cinnamon and ash. No one finishes it. Not because it's bad. Because there's too much. You hear a steward argue with a cook. The 4th course is behind. The almond milk sauce has broken. A noblewoman sends back her serving. Too cold, she says. You think about what you ate today. If anything. A crust of bread, a slice of onion, a piece of dried meat, mostly gristle. Eaten on the march, by a hedgerow, in the dark. Here, plates are cleared before they're empty. You see a boy toss half a capon to a hound with velvet collars. The dog licks grease from the stones. The knight beside you coughs once, then turns away. Not from shame. From hunger he won't speak of. You shift in your seat. The armor beneath your surcoat presses against your ribs. You haven't taken it off in hours. You used to loosen it during meals, but once you missed the call to arms. Took too long to buckle back in. You were beaten for that. Now you stay ready. Your lord, at the head table, lifts his fork. It's silver. His fingers are soft. His lips shine with duck fat and imported fig jam. He does not look at you. The kitchen doors open again. Another round begins. Someone says, "Bring the sweets." The room applauds. You close your eyes and remember the last time you ate warm bread. It was months ago. You burned your fingers on the crust, laughed about it. With a friend who's now buried beneath a tree with no name, you stand now, not because you've been invited to speak, but because your body aches more sitting still. No one notices. The nobles are busy with dessert. There are candied nuts, coated in honey and rose water, apple slices poached in red wine, wafers dusted with sugar ground fine as flour. A lord nearby names the cooks aloud, praises their technique, their timing, the clarity of the almond milk. He does not know your name. You've ridden at his side, held ground while he negotiated from a tent, took a pike to the thigh so his banner wouldn't fall. But he forgets. It's not personal. You understand that now. Knights are useful, but not memorable. Not unless you're noble, or die well, or lose famously. The hall is filled with names, families stretching back to Charlemagne, or so they claim. Each coat of arms is painted clean. Every crest explained loudly to some guest daughter. One man speaks of his father's victory at Crécy. He was not there. He was not yet born. But he tells the story as if it was his own. Your story, the one with the cold river crossing, and the ambush in the orchard. No one will tell that. Your squire might remember, if he lives, if he's lucky. But he'll have his own wounds to carry, his own debts, his own silence. No songs will be sung of the day you held the wall. No feast will be named for you, no statue. You look again at the high table, at the lord whose lands you've defended. He's smiling now, telling a tale. His rings clink softly as he gestures, gold and garnet, the kind that leave bruises if they strike skin. He's younger than you. He's never killed a man. But he knows what wine to serve with lamprey pie. He knows how to host. And that, in this room, is enough. The fire burns low. The laughter softens, then fades. Guests drift from the hall like leaves in wind, cloaks gathered, goblets left half full. A minstrel hums the last verse of a song. No one truly listened to. The tune lingers like smoke in the rafters. You remain by the wall, still watching, still armored. No one tells you to leave. No one thanks you for staying. A servant begins clearing plates, dragging half-eaten roasts into buckets. Puddings barely touched. Bread soaked with meat juice, fit now only for dogs or dirt. The floor is sticky. The air has changed. Rich scents replaced by the quiet breath of coals. Your feet ache. You walk out into the dark. The night is cold again. The same cold it's always been. The kind that finds the seams in your armor, that stiffens your fingers, that bites at the edges of old wounds. You pass the stables, hear your horse snort in his stall. He's awake. He remembers. You unsling your bedroll beside the barracks wall. Fur against stone. Hard ground, no roof. You lie down with your cloak wrapped around your shoulders, the same one you wore in the hall. It smells of smoke, and blood, and you. There's no candle, only the moon. You close your eyes, and tomorrow, you'll rise before the sun, pull on armor cold as ice, Fight for land that isn't yours. Guard men who won't remember you, because you are a knight, and that's what a knight does. And now, you lie still. The hall is empty. The fire is cold. The cloak covers your shoulders, and sleep begins to weigh heavier than steel ever did. Tonight you've seen it clearly, what the songs don't sing, what the books don't say. Knighthood wasn't glory. It was service, routine, endurance. It was the quiet cracking of bones beneath iron, the soft scrape of helmet leather, the creak of a saddle that's carried more pain than pride. You've walked through the day in their boots, seen the feast from the wrong side of the firelight. You've heard what their bones whispered from beneath centuries of silence. They didn't live in legend. They lived in mud and frost and forgottenness. But they lived. And sometimes that was enough. So rest now. Let the armor fall away. Let the clamor of halls and hooves fade into a gentler rhythm. There's no campaign tomorrow, no lord to answer to, no weight to carry, only breath, only stillness, only sleep.